start. We have a fairly short agenda tonight, and as we have no need for legal advice, we have no legal advisor here tonight. We also, I think, I'm not quite sure, have a new member, Mrs. Iona Parker. I wasn't sure whether you'd been to a licensing meeting before. You have. Well, sorry. We now come to the minutes of the apologies for absence. We have
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Apologies from Councillors Johnson, Wright and Rose.
Okay. I have the minutes of the previous meeting here. Has everyone read the minutes? Would someone like to approve? Would someone like to propose? Okay, I have Councillor Euston, seconded by Councillor Green. We now come to public question time, where there are no...
Declarations of interest.
Sorry, declarations of interest. Well, this is after public question time. There is none. Declarations of interest. Has anyone any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest or non-pecuniary interest relating to items on the agenda having regard to the code of conduct for members and having taken appropriate advice where necessary before the meeting? Anyone like to declare? Or? No. Okay. We now come to the first piece of business on the agenda. That's pavement licences on pages 5 to 9. I'll ask John Meddings to present the report.
Thank you, Chairman. For some of you, this will feel like deja vu because, as you're aware, during the coronavirus pandemic, the Business and Planning Act was introduced to allow a fast-track, simplified process for premises to utilise areas that weren't owned by them, i.e. why it's called pavement licensing. The government extended the Business and Planning Act regulations already to expire in 2022, and they subsequently extended it further to the 30th of September 2023. This was it wasn't entirely known to officers that this would definitely happen, but it has. There is a pavement licensing system that runs in tandem with this, but it is likely that this will become part of legislation rather than a temporary measure in the future. But the changes that we've made to how we process the application is mainly through the conditions attached to those licences. As you'll see from the report before you, the conditions that have been either removed or amended, the first specifically dealing with the COVID-19 guidance and safe working practices, that's now to be removed. And additional conditions, as you'll see, relate to the regulations themselves and have been amended to reflect the additional year added to these provisions. And then there are a number of conditions that are added that give the council greater flexibility with determining the applications and ensuring that they sit comfortably with how the towns and the emergency services operate. So you'll see that the council reserved the right to remove some of the street furniture in specific events organised by the council or on behalf of the council, and this is to cover events such as the Christmas markets and any specific activities planned by the council. And then lastly, it's purely a sensible safety provision that making licence holders aware of that they're responsible to ensure that fire hydrants and signage indicating the whereabouts and of means of escape routes aren't to be obstructed. That's a basic provision anyway in other legislation, but it's a way of reminding licence holders when these are granted regarding their responsibilities. There's no effective decisions to be made by members. This is more of an advice on what's happening, because how the regulations were introduced were for a more that these had to be quick, they were temporary, and so therefore the changes have come into effect naturally through the update of the regulations. And the report is to update members on what their expectations are regarding how these pavement licences will be issued, and obviously determined if they become an issue. One thing that is going to have an impact on the team is not just necessarily the work, but there's a maximum fee attached to these licences of £100, which in today's terms is very nominal, and any increased expenditure to us as a team will be covered through other budgets, because in this day and age, any sort of application process involving consultations and things like that will obviously exceed that £100 threshold fairly easily. So as I've discussed, there's no decision to be made as such. It's allowing you to be aware of what's occurring. I've discussed the financial implications. There's no legal implications other than the responsibility set out the legislation, or the regulations, I should say. And yeah, I'm happy to obviously answer any questions. But like I've said, this is something that's been in place. The government has effectively rolled over these temporary measures, and now we're looking at them expiring in 2023. Something to bear in mind also that I haven't mentioned is that applicants, there was no renewal process because they were temporary measures. So every time the new regulations come into force, new applications would need to be received and processed. But because of the fee involved being nominal, businesses aren't unduly affected by that. It's just unfortunate that they've had to go through the same process again each time. But yeah, as I said, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
I'd just like to ask a question myself before putting it out to members. In a few applications recently, we have had to put additional clause in because of the tightness of the situation and the proximity of furniture or barriers to the highway section of the pedestrianised high street. Would that not have been able to be incorporated into this document generally, or was that?
Yeah, Chairman, that's a very good point, and that is something that we deal. Maybe what I should have alluded to is that part of the provisions allow us to attach conditions on a case-by-case basis. So, quite rightly, as you've mentioned, the pedestrian area in the town, in Braintree Town Centre, is a good example of that, where the assumption is that there's a huge non-traffic area that can be utilised under this provision, but the reality is there still needs to be means of escape and emergency provisions, and yeah, so conditions are being attached that address specific concerns. As a very good example, we had one application that is affected by the market stalls, and there's a specific provision or condition in that licence that stipulates on these days they can't do that, or they have to reduce their area on certain days and things like that. So, and that's a key tool, because some of these locations aren't as straightforward as the pedestrianised areas of Braintree Town, and therefore they need some real thinking, because businesses want to use, or not just during the coronavirus pandemic, but businesses want to continue to still utilise this area that they're allowed to use under this piece of legislation, and so therefore it's a difficult balancing act because the business want maximum covers for this area when the considerations for us are far wide, and hence the consultation process, you know, and who's involved in that. But generally, from personal experience, it's a case of working with the individual applicants and the responsible authorities to discuss, you know, to work a sensible solution. And I think once they realise that this is a sort of added benefit, that it's not their land, they're getting the ability to utilise this, they generally are quite flexible in what they're prepared to do.
Thank you. Councillor Raymond.
Thank you, Chairman. Conditions under Section 4, 4.7.1, there is a provision saying 7 days prior notice to any event. Is that a standard practice across all bodies, or this can be changed? Because in my opinion, personal opinion, that 7 days notice cannot be adequate for some businesses, and I mean, is that something we can look at to amend, or we can increase the number of days we can give notice to the license holders?
Yes, I think that is obviously something that can be currently, as I've said, there isn't a decision to make. So the decision for that condition has already been made. I know that sounds very counterintuitive for what we're used to, because it's normally us presenting information and getting the okay from yourselves. But with that being said, that sort of comment and feedback can be used to check. We're not set. It's not set in stone that once we do this, that's it for the year. We can look at that. That figure has been come to from conversations with businesses. It's not a case of it's just been plucked out of the air. But generally, my understanding is, because it mentions us as a council specifically rather than for any eventuality, I can't imagine that. I don't want to make promises I can't keep, but generally, if we're having a Christmas market, we know, and the local businesses are involved in that. Not always constructively, but yeah, the decision has been made. And just to be clear, it's not myself sitting down with other officers and just this has gone through a legal process and all of that. But yeah, that's something I can definitely take back and say that that's been raised, because, you know, I think from what you've said, that is quite valid point. For 7 days is quite a short time for anyone to do anything, I'm finding at the moment. So yeah, so I will definitely take that back. Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Euston.
Thank you, Chair. I think you've answered it already about renewing of the existing licence, and if I'm understanding it, it can't be renewed. These ones that are just being extended until September. So you can't actually renew it when September 23 comes?
Yeah, this is good, and lots of different councils are doing things very different. But because, as I discussed earlier, that we only became aware that this was going to be extended shortly before the actual the expiry of the other licenses or the previous licenses. So, although they're not renewals, because the system wasn't in place for there to be a renewal, because they were supposed to all expire at this set time, they are effectively renewals. It's just that we're under. So the thing is, we couldn't introduce a renewal process, so the licenses all went out that they had to expire, so we couldn't change that. And we weren't allowed to issue licenses for a lesser period than 3 months. So we were left with a position where we just had to tell everybody that held a licence that they needed to apply again and try and deal with the licences expediently as possible. People have done different things up and down the country, but the bottom line is, because the regulations weren't in force, it would have been impossible to do something different. The businesses generally had a problem with this because we managed to get the message out. We knew who held licences previously and we contacted them, and the ones that wanted to renew had had ample opportunity to renew. It's just technically not a renewal. It's just it's another application for a new licence.
Thank you. The second question, if I may. I know that the £100 isn't covering the cost, but how much are we losing on each one? Do you know?
We will know eventually, but we don't. So how licensing works is because it's cost recovery, officers allocate every bit of their time to a certain field of licensing, and then we make sure them costs are proportionately spread. So you're paying for the service you're asking for as such. With this, if you wanted my personal opinion, I would say it's well in excess of £100, purely because I've realised the work that goes into the negotiations I was talking about. We have senior officers go down and have face-to-face meetings. The thing is, because of the numbers we're talking about, and the problems we've had with the short notice periods and it being temporary legislation, is we've had to do that because it would have long-term problems down the line. So it's a case of, yes, we are taking a hit on this, and it is taking a lot of officers' time, but the numbers we're talking about is not. I can imagine it's more of a problem for, cities and things like that have large, town centres with pedestrian, that can utilise that. But then saying that, it's not. I keep focusing on pedestrian area. We do this in Finchinfield, for instance, and try and utilise the places like that, which are far more challenging. Yeah. So sorry, that isn't an answer, but that gives you an idea of
Any more questions? Councillor Mrs. Beavis.
Thank you, Chairman. It's not really so much of a question, but a sort of an observation, really. Only I went down the town earlier on, and I was quite pleasantly surprised, actually, at how many businesses in Braintree now are using the outside space. And I don't know, with this £100 thing, I mean, it's a bit difficult, isn't it, really, to know. Obviously we can't charge any more, but at the same time, I mean, the town was buzzing this afternoon. It was a really, clement afternoon, and maybe it's something that we need to think about in the future, because it's not always just about cost, is it? It's about what it brings to the town. And when I walked through today, I kind of left thinking, felt quite good in the town today, actually. So, yeah, it's good to see. Thank you.
Yes, I'm inclined to agree with that. Having the seats outside and the furniture and awnings and things like that entirely changes the nature of High Street and Bank Street and other areas. Yes, it also contributes to business growth, but shouldn't get too political. We now get on to item 6 on the agenda, which is the Licensing Committee update. Again, this is just an update, but if anyone has any questions, I'll allow John to...
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just briefly go over what's in front of you. So starting off at the beginning, obviously, the gambling policy is now live, I'm pleased to say, obviously belatedly, but we're now fully compliant with what's required of us and the policies on the website and up and running as it should be. You've probably all heard the application that we were due to be determining, obviously, didn't happen in the end through negotiation, but still everything is in place and we're in a better position than we were at the beginning of the year. So the sex establishment policy, as you may recall, the draft policy started consultation on the 12th of September and is running for 12 weeks till the 4th of December. It's out for public consultation. We don't generally get a great deal of response to it, either from the industry or from the general public. We've we try to go out to as many groups as possible, but still it's, you know, possibly because we've only got the one establishment in the district, and it is where, you know, away from sensitive areas as such, that maybe it's not. But we will see, that information will be collated and then reported back to you at the next licensing committee after the closing date of the consultation. The taxi and private hire policy, obviously we've been working on this for a while now, because of the demands of what's going on for the team. We're still struggling. We are streamlining what we're doing and trying to allocate some of the tasks the senior members of the team do, to allow to free up time. And I'm personally trying to take a couple of days out of the week to get this done, because the impact on adding a new taxi, the new policy for that area of work will have dramatic effects on how quickly and efficiently we can deal with decision making. So it's very much something that we need to get done. We need to allocate time. Going on from that, members maybe where last time we mentioned about resources for the team, that knocks on to what I've just been saying. There is now a business case going through for additional resources. I don't know what they'll be, because, again, going over what we've just discussed, the licensing is self-funding. We've got all this additional work, so we're bringing in income, and effectively that income needs to be, without sounding like the old-fashioned days, it needs to be spent in the terms that we're bringing in the income in, so we need to use that to make what we're doing more efficient, because there will be a time when the service starts to suffer, i.e. not getting things like the application because of the sheer amount of application. And I don't think I've included the figures, but we've gone from doing 6 or 7 driver applications a month to now doing over 100, and that's the same with vehicles. And for a team as small as our team, that has dramatic impact, because of I feel like I'm making excuses now, but because of the school, the new business that's come in is predominantly school contracts and retired people. The applicants are generally older, and they come with health issues that we have to investigate and have conversation with consultants and doctors. So it's a chicken for eggs situation, because but we are looking at it. It's with senior management now, and hopefully we'll get a decision soon. But because of how licensing works, as in we get 3 years to sort of become cost neutral, it's very difficult to know that this work will continue on for years and years. So it's likely that they'll be taken on either as a short-term contract. But the problem with that is generally, I understand, as an organisation, we don't like the short-term contracts and temporary contracts and things like that. So it's a case of, trying to balance it all out. But yeah, that for me, it's good news. And it's not just about administration either. It's about the enforcement side of things, because we have suddenly got, we've always had it, a massive influx of illegal dog breeding that we're trying to deal with. And we may get additional resources to deal with that. But yeah, sorry, I've sort of gone off on a tangent, really. So, sorry.
I'm sure that you'll get a lot of support from members for your request to get extra resources when it comes to full council.
Thank you, Chairman. So as I've discussed, the Mercer slots application for the bingo premises in the Braintree town was successfully mediated between the police and the councillor that made a representation, and so that application was granted. I believe they're now dealing with the planning process before they're in a position to open, which I understand may be more challenging. There was an objection for Crescent Sports and Social Club, as you can see, and once again, that was mediated between all the parties involved. And it's another example. It can be very time consuming to have these decisions determined at committees, not just for officers but for yourselves. It's, you know, and where we can assist in the mediation between the parties, we will, because it's a better use of everybody's time if these things can be, you know, mediated out at that stage rather than have formal hearings. And the same also for the club premises certificate at Topsfield Cricket Club, but that was a much smaller scale. I'm pleased to say that we're now compliant with the National Register of Taxi and Private Hire revocations and refusals. So just briefly, that's where we will check a national database to ensure that applicants aren't suspended aren't revoked or refused at another district or council across the country. And that's very relevant in today's times where people will attempt to get licences in various districts, boroughs across the country, and will be transient and move around to try and get a licence where they can. And it's not just about criminal convictions either, because that's more the easy one. You know, although we all, as councils, will make different decisions, we will get other information such as of their behaviour and conduct during their time as a licence holder elsewhere, and that can be just as useful as knowing that when we're determining in applications. We've currently got a draft of the new, some of the members here may recall for a number of years now, we've been promising to upgrade our forms and modernise them, and we've now done that, and hopefully that will it doesn't just allow us to be compliant with NR3, it's a more streamlined application, it's clearer for the applicant. When declarations are made, it makes your decision as members easier, so you don't have applicants sitting in front of you saying that they got confused and they didn't know what they were filling in the forms. Now it's a lot more clearer, there's notes involved that they can assist them, and fingers crossed it will help not just us but you with your decision making. Officers continue to attend the local pub watches in Braintree, Witham and Howstead, and this is just a way of us opening dialogue with the licensed trade and obviously keeping updated with issues for them, and obviously the police can share national issues and things like that. And you may recall that the hot topic at the moment is drink spiking, and that's one of the avenues that are used to obviously deal with trying to get that message out. We continue to do monthly proactive enforcement with Essex Police, where our officers go out and do checks on licensed premises or licensed taxi carriages and private hires. The last enforcement evening was actually cancelled because of the close proximity to the death of the Queen, and we made the decision to cancel that. The next one is actually this Friday. I'm just not sure I should be saying this in a public forum, but yeah, that's what we're doing it. So behave.
Oh no.
Hope
Yeah.
no one's watching.
So I've already covered in great depth the pavement licences, and probably, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but probably one of the most interesting things that come out recently is the government's intention to licence non-surgical cosmetic procedures. Now, it's not personally interesting to me, it's more of the fact that someone's just come up with this idea, made a statement that it will be in place by July of next year, but no one knows how it's going to work, who's going to be responsible to it. The likelihood is it will be our responsibility, I think, although there's because we sit in environmental health, we do tattooing already, so it sits naturally with that. And there is the possibility it go to county, but I would have thought that's unlikely. And then it would be we have environmental health officers that do the inspections for tattooing, but I'm not sure whether... See, this is the problem. That I don't think anyone knows what's going to happen and what the government's intentions is. And it's very brave and optimistic to say they'll have something in place. But it is quite possible, as they did with, if any of you recall, scrap metal licensing, where they can just put this all together very rushed and then just say a few weeks before it goes live that this is now what you're doing and this is how to do it. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that goes. Because again, it will be an additional amount of work and no one knows how it will be funded, that it's likely there'll be license fees involved. But it's just, you know, if you bear in mind that we set our fees in March every year, how would we be able to set a fee not knowing if we were going to, what the process was? So yeah, it's going to be difficult and challenging, but it will be interesting. And I think generally speaking across the board of licensing officers and professionals and the industry, people are very pro this happening. So it's going to happen, but you'll have to stay tuned to see how it's going to take effect. And that's it. I'm obviously happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
There's obviously a whole gamut of non-surgical cosmetic procedures, so you could be quite busy. Could be a few more staff. People coming along complaining that Botox has gone wrong or something. But I just had a question about 3.3. Do you have any idea when the first draft will come out ahead of the official guidance or not?
Yeah, I think the way it's working currently is I think I will have because the policy generally is covers drivers, which is normally one policy, vehicles, which is another, operators, and then there's conviction policies and how we make decisions. And the idea is to bring it all together. I think to just make progress, I think it's probably going to be a case of it may be that the relevant part for drivers is done sooner. We let members have a look at that feedback, but then not go to consultation and then do the same with the vehicles. And then when it's all together, we go out to consultation. And then if that's not how members see the best way of doing it, but the problem is if you're eager to obviously see the draft, to get involved in the changes, but to wait till the end of all of that being done may be too much, and it may be better to send it in a piecemeal approach so we can deal with changes and members' ideas and how they think we can do things different, or and then incorporate them changes, but then hold on to it. Because I think what legal are very reluctant to do is just do piecemeal consultations again and again, and the trade will get consultation fatigue, and we really want them engaged. But it could be something we could do in that members have their opinions, get it to a place we want to, and then we have some working group discussions with the trade, and then get to a point where we're happy, and then go through them in stages, and then when we've got the whole policy together, we then put that to consultation and then go from there. And then if legislation did change, we'd still have a document that potentially members are happy with and can be changed, and then not have to go back to consultation. So, yeah, I do worry that I'm not giving you straight. I'm just giving you. I'm not answering the question, but the key thing is for us and for yourselves, I imagine, is that we need to make progress. And the problem is by making I personally was struggling with saying that we're tackling this whole thing. So I've broken it down into drivers, because you've got the only two people, there's only really two of us in the team that can do that, and we're still managing the team, and we've still got these just general day-to-day responsibilities. But with additional resources and us trying to work and do things differently, just allocating time to the task and getting it done, because it's not, it's no good for me saying to you, we're busy, sorry, we're not. I've got nothing for you, but that's just my view of how we could potentially progress this and get some sort of involvement to members.
I think that doing it in sections, so we could all possibly get a better quality of examination of what's there than if we did it in one package. Any more questions? Councillor Euston off the starting blocks, followed by Councillor Mrs. Parker and Councillor Raymond. Anyone on that side?
I was, but if it's not,
oh, sorry.
it may be covered.
Just, it's more an observation and curiosity than anything else. On section 4, point 1, point 2 and point 3, they all talk about issues that were raised and mediation, and they all went away. And it sort of put into my mind this picture of rampaging bingo players charging down the street, smashing windows and stuff with their sticky pens or whatever it is. And I'm just intrigued as to what the issues were that had to be mediated out. You know what I mean? Do we take their Zimmer frames away or something?
Allow you to make that remark.
Excuse me for being ageist, but I am old, so I can. But it just, I was just totally bemused by it. And I had this picture in my head that's probably not true, but, it's bingo halls we're talking about,
I can give you a very vague answer. In the fact that it was generally about the operator, and I don't think the operator would have any concerns about, because there was just a concern that it wasn't actually going to be used for the plan, and it was actually going to be used as a way of bringing gaming machines into the, and I think and I think generally speaking, once everyone got together and had us and put their point across, it was
Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Yes, it's just in relation to the alcohol licences. I was wondering whether there are any issues in this district with people being, I can't remember what this, it's not spiked, but literally just sort of had needles injected with drugs, because I know that is definitely an issue in some towns.
Yeah, we haven't had any specific. Well, I've asked this question because it's come up before. There's no specific instance of this. It's nationally there has been, but not that I'm aware of in our district. It's very much about the drink spiking. But when I talk to the police and how they're investigating these, a lot of them are people assuming they've had their drink spiked when not necessarily, that there are lots of other factors that are involved once the investigation's taken place. But nationally, the government, and I think it was the LGA, brought some guidance out about how local authorities and the police and the industry could go about tackling this. And it's a very, very difficult, thing to tackle, because you can hand out as many drink covers and things, but then that's just not how people operate when they're out. And yeah, it's just an awareness thing. I think the key message has always been that people, first and foremost, need to take some personal responsibility and ensure that they don't leave drinks unattended and things like that. So, and I think that's generally the message. And the police have said to me, all of their interactions with the premises in our district, they have no concerns that no one's doing what they should as a business. So if the businesses are demonstrating that they're doing all they can, and they can do a lot, but it is limited, then it's about awareness and making people sure change how they behave when they go out, which isn't easy. But yeah.
Councillor Raymond.
Thank you, Chairman. I have an observation under 5.1. Do we have I'm sure we have, but do we have a mechanism where we keep records of any complaints we receive regarding drivers or their conduct behaviour towards the passenger? And if we do, how do we investigate? And that's it. Yeah, thank you.
So every single driver has a record on a digital record on our system. All complaints are recorded there. They don't expire, but they become less relevant the older they get. The vast majority of complaints against drivers are unsubstantiated, not because it didn't happen, but it's very difficult evidentially to have a passenger and a driver. Officers will look into it, but it's still recorded, and there's obviously the officers are experienced enough to identify patterns of behaviour. And obviously, if you've got lots of unsubstantiated complaints about a specific issue, then obviously there's something more there. And that's why we retain the records beyond what normally would be retained. They'll all be used so for instance, when members sit on drivers panels, if there are any recorded complaints, that's part of the report. And it goes through to assist members in their decision making. So obviously, if they're dealing with determining a driver's fit and proper status, and it's about a specific issue, they will also get the backstory regarding any complaints that they've had previously, and it all comes together and help to make a decision. But the good news is that the NR3 register will not just result on us checking other people, checking applicants against the other councils. It will be a case of if we make a decision to refuse or revoke a driver's or an applicant's licence here, we will upload them details up into the database, and other councils would have the facility to check that. So, yeah, the complaints are recorded. The disappointing thing is that how much you can actually investigate. It's changing with the amount of drivers with CCTV in their cars and things like that. So, and the access we have to that. But generally speaking, it's just out as a matter of interest. The vast majority of the complaints are members of the public complaining about speeding, traffic lights, abusive behaviour. And ultimately, you'll interview the driver, and they'll say that never happened, and you'll speak to the complainant, and they'll say that it did, and you're left with a case of we can't do anything, but we will remind the driver of their behaviour and tell them that it will be recorded on their file, and it just helps paint a picture. I hope that helps.
Thank you. If I can follow up, how many complaints do we receive on an average monthly basis?
You've definitely put me on the spot there. I would be guessing, but I would say we receive. Please don't. This is just me. I've got nothing in front of me, but just from what we see, we receive 3 or 4 a week, I'd say, and the vast majority of them. It's going up just purely because we had 200 drivers, and now we've got 1,000 drivers. It's gonna. Yeah.
May I ask a question? Well, it's not. I beg your pardon.
Thank you. Just a couple of observations and a question just on that. Just on that, I mean, I wonder where going forward we kind of set the benchmark on what activates. I mean, I was involved in the Rotherham case, for example, and I'm always mindful we just do need to keep an eye on complaints. Secondly, I mean, I would completely endorse the need for more resource, and I've complimented John previously on the work his team do, and I just think it's fabulous. But I really just wanted to mention 8.2 on this non-surgical cosmetic procedures, and I mean, at the end of the day, we don't know what we don't know, but if you just take, for example, Jackie's patch in Housestead, I mean, the amount of shops growing in Housestead. And from my understanding as well, not that I've ever had an injection stuck in my face personally, but, you know, it's what goes on in the back room as well. Do you know what I mean? And you hear all this stuff, and you actually blaring the hairdresser actually does that behind the curtain kind of thing. It's huge. And so good luck with that, John. I'm not quite sure whether we're going to be charging a fee, and if we are, that would all come in to support the need for extra resource. But I just wondered, ultimately, as a council, do we have to put a public notice in the press about this, so that, I mean, a lot of it's women, and I could imagine, you know, the women of Housestead, and just there'll be an uprising, because I had no idea about this. So, you know, I think it's maybe something, a little announcement needs to be made after Christmas, perhaps, or something. Thank you, Jim.
I think you're very much right. I think beyond this room, there's not many people know that this is what's planned, and the public definitely won't. I would like to think that there would be an advertising campaign highlighting what is going to go on and what's required. I think it will see an increase in cost, obviously, because the businesses will pass that on to the consumer. It will. I'm pretty sure if it becomes our responsibility, it will be self-funding like everything else. And the government's general stance is that, as the last previous lots of licensing regimes that have been brought in, they will leave it to local authorities to determine criteria and things like that. There'll be a minimum criteria, I imagine. It'd be interesting to see if criminal records checks are brought in because of the one-to-one nature of it, and they're not necessarily in the open. So that's something. But then it's not in place for other similar regimes. So it'll be interesting to see. But yeah, I would like to say the government would do an advertising campaign, but it never happened with the animal licensing. We were promised a big campaign about illegal breeders and daycare for your dogs, but that never happened. So, but we'll hope, I think. But yeah.
Councillor Mrs. Bolton.
Thank you. After that, Councillor Beavis, I think mine's almost irrelevant. However, it's purely an observation. Going back to taxis and the complaints about the drivers, a lot of this is about perception and the people who are complaining and what they think is wrong and how they are being treated. So I think we have to take, to a certain degree, with a pinch of salt, although it has to be investigated. I think, we've all been in taxis one time or another, and some of the drivers are not very communicative, and some people get very upset and irritated by that, and so they think it's for complaints. So I think it's all down to perception at the end of the day. That's all I wanted to say. And on another point, surgical intervention here is not going to happen.
Yes. Thank you. No more questions? No. I'd just like to make a point that I've been given the new application forms. Is it possible to circulate those as a draft so people have a look at it?
Yes, it is. I just wanted to make sure you had them first.
Yeah, they're a whole lot simpler and clearer than the previous one. Yeah. Okay then. So there's no more business, and there is nothing for private session. I shall close the meeting at 8:04 p.m.